Welcome to part 4 of this video series featuring the essential inputs into the AMTS program. We've covered farm and general settings in part 1. In part 2, Sam Fessenden told us about barn and lot inputs. In part 3, I taught you the essential inputs on the cattle screen. Now here in part 4, we will focus on the characterization of feeds and some navigation around the feed screen in the program. Before we start into the feed screen, I will give you this quick introduction to the core calculations in AMTS, which use the Cornell Net Carbohydrate and Protein System, or CNCPS. Understanding at least the general idea of the system is very important to understanding which feed analysis we need to focus on to get the correct inputs for the model. When we compare CNCPS-based models to other systems that are out there in the world, especially static matrix-based systems, we oftentimes have a single feed value for energy, or RUP. The CNCPS does not use energy values on a feed basis. It calculates them internally. This is the same with rumen undegraded protein. We don't use static values. They are calculated within the CNCPS system. The supply side of the model is hinged around this very important equation. Digestibility equals the rate of degradation over the rate of degradation plus the rate of passage. This relies on two key parts of information, one being the rate of degradation of a feed fraction, for example, the rate of degradation of fiber in corn silage or of fiber in grass silage, and the rate of passage of that feed fraction through the rumen. We could be talking about the rate of passage for NDF or the rate of passage for starch. These two things are very important. One is intrinsic to the feed and something that we get from the feed analysis information. The other is intrinsic to the animal and is something that we base off the amount of intake, the weight of the animal, and things like the stage of lactation. This central equation is used to calculate the disappearance of a given substance in the rumen. The rate that substance disappears, especially something like fermentable starch or fermentable fiber, is what determines the amount of microbes we can grow from that substrate. In the end, once we can calculate the disappearance of that substrate, we can start to calculate things like metabolizable energy and metabolizable protein. Metabolizable energy is calculated from the digestible nutrients. Using this equation from each of the different feed fractions for carbohydrates and proteins and fats, etc., the metabolizable protein is the sum of the microbial protein generated from the degradation of fermentable carbohydrates and the addition of the undegraded feed proteins. When we calculate the digestibility of protein, we can also calculate the part of the protein that escapes degradation in the rumen and can be treated as rumen undegraded feed protein. I know that was a very quick introduction to the CNCPS. There are a lot of nuances to the system, but just to help you understand the general reason for why we ask for certain feed analyses in the AMTS system. One of the questions we are always asked is, with the information from a feed analysis, which one is the most important, or which ones are the most important? Which ones do I actually need to focus on? This slide helps pull some of that apart, and it also helps introduce you to a little bit of the carbohydrate and protein fractions that we talk about in the CNCPS. You may see the labels protein A, B, and C, or carbohydrate A, B, and C. The measurement that we use in the lab to determine these different pools is listed here in the center. The speed of degradation, or the rate of degradation, is given here in quantitative terms relative to the other fractions. The red values here are the ones that we can measure in a lab, and these are the ones that we need to have in order for the model to be able to predict well. Of course, there are many more measurements, and there are some that are more important than others. I encourage you to look into some of the sensitivity analysis that have been performed on the CNCPS to help understand which ones are most important. That will help guide you through the process of understanding which analyses need to be performed most often. We have a blog on our website outlining this information. The link is in the video description below. Sam Fessenden also covered this information very well in a webinar on our nutritionist series. The link to that webinar is also below. With that background covered, let's switch to the functionality of the feed screen. Reviewing the information we covered in the previous videos in this essential series, we are working the program from left to right. You've already created the farm. Your next step was to describe the barn or lot where the animals are housed in terms of environmental conditions and physical requirements. After that, we spent time creating our animal groups and describing each group's physiological characteristics. Now we are ready to describe the feeds we will offer in the diets we will create. On first opening, you will notice the screen is divided into two sides. The left side contains feed banks with feeds we call library feeds. In order to use a feed on the farm, you must move it from the left side into the farm feed bank, which will show here on the right side. Within the program, feed banks are repositories of many feeds that you can use on your farm. By default, your program comes with 3 preloaded feed banks: AMTS Commercial, AMTS Feeds, and AMTS Tropical. An additional feed bank, AMTS EU Feeds, can be downloaded through the Tools drop-down in the menu bar. Select AMTS Download. There you will see control buttons to download various feed banks, the AMTS User Guide, and Program Translation Resource files. This action box can be used anytime you want to check to make sure you have the latest feed bank installed on your computer. To do so, click on the control button for the desired file. It will download. By default, it should download to the proper location. If it does not, move it from whatever folder it ends up in and put it in Documents, AMTS, amts.cattle.pro, and into the feed banks folder. You can ensure that the program automatically checks for the most current version of these 4 feed banks by keeping these boxes ticked in Settings, Startup Settings. When those are ticked, the program will check for updates on opening as long as you have an internet connection. In this same way, you can share feed banks with other AMTS users. We will get to how and why you might do this in a later video. Now, I'll give you a brief overview of feed banks. Feeds in the feed bank side of the feed screen can be considered index or standard representative feeds. The 4 feed banks preloaded have different characteristics. The AMTS commercial feed bank contains commercial products that may be included in ruminant rations. This feed bank has a couple of special characteristics that make it easier to use in AMTS. From a commercial product supplier standpoint, feeds originating from this feed bank are locked. Except for a few legally regulated nutrients, the complete nutrient breakdown of these feeds is not visible to the user. Not only are they not visible, they cannot be edited in the same way other feeds are. The only editable fields are pricing related. The AMTS tropical feeds will be more typical of feeds found in Brazil, Argentina, and tropical areas. The AMTS EU feed bank is a relatively small feed bank comprised of feeds with their analyses more typical of European forages and concentrates. For more information about the EU feed bank, in the description below we have included a link to the blog that Sam Fessenden wrote when we first released that feed bank. AMTS Italia is an assortment of feeds typical to Italian farms with names in Italian. The AMTS Feeds feed bank is the same as the CNCPS feed library. In the AMTS feeds, there are hundreds of disparate feeds that are statistical representations of sometimes many, sometimes just a few actual analyses of that feed. For example, corn grain ground fine is a single analysis that is the average of thousands of fine ground corn samples. These are the main AMTS provided feed banks. Users can create their own, focusing on feeds from a specific mill, or have feed banks that have been created for them by their company. In order to create recipes, you need to have feeds available on the farm. This is accomplished by bringing copies of library feeds from a feed bank into the farm feed bank, there on the right side of the screen. When you have found a feed that you want to have on the farm, shown here on the right side, click this control to send a copy of that feed into the farm over here. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are thousands of feeds in the combined feed libraries. While you can scroll down through all of the feeds, we have built in several shortcuts that will make finding the right feed faster. First, using the feed bank dropdown. By default, this shows all feeds in active feed banks. The dropdown allows you to select a specific feed bank to limit your search. A second shortcut is to type the feed name here in this field. For example, typing corn in this box will sort all of the feeds with corn in the name. A couple of things to keep in mind. One, you have to key enter to begin the sort, and two, you have to have the correct spelling. You can also search by source ID. You can key in the full or partial ID to look for all the feeds in that category. These numbers are based off the original CNCPS source IDs. Finally, you can narrow down the feeds by feed type. For example, let's say you want to see all of the feeds categorized as energy. You can select it from that drop-down and narrow the list. Please note, commercial and non-commercial feed types are differentiated. A couple of feed type notes. Feeds from the commercial feed bank cannot be edited. They are padlock feeds and their nutrient analysis cannot be changed. There may be products you want to use in your diets that are not in our feed libraries. In that case, you will want to bring in a regular feed that has close feed attributes to either the commercial product or the product that you're trying to build. Then you can rename the feed and edit its nutrient values. There are groups of feeds with special attributes that make this a greater challenge. To help in this, we have a small number of feeds with the generic feed name. In the search window, type in generic, and this will bring up a list of feeds that include bypass proteins, prilled fats, and specific amino acids. The feed MinVit is a blank analysis. It shows no nutrients. That can be used as a substitute for any feed. Finally, in the left side of the screen, you can see the basic nutrient analysis on any feed by left-clicking on that feed name. So let's bring a few feeds into the farm, demonstrating various methods. I'm going to build a pretty simple lactating cow ration. I may choose to start off with a corn silage. When I type in corn silage and press enter, I see a lot of different corn silages that are available processed and unprocessed. I'll take a fairly generic one here. Like this corn silage, processed 35% dry matter, 45% NDF, and a medium chop. Once you have brought all the feeds you might use into the right or the farm side of the screen, you can click on the hide bar. That will minimize the feed library section and allow better viewing of the farm feeds. You can bring the feed banks window back up by clicking the import bar at any time. Now that feeds are in the farm feed bank, you can and should edit them to reflect the actual feeds found on the farm. Feeds can be edited right in this screen in line, or in a way that I find more easily is to use this edit button to bring up an edit dialog box. In that edit window, you can see the present nutrient analysis and can edit the nutrient value in this column here. As I have mentioned in previous videos, I've modified my row contrasts from default colors to better show editable or active fields. This is accomplished in Settings through Program Settings. Scroll down through to see the available fields. These labels are intended to match those of most feed analysis laboratories. As I mentioned earlier in the recording, the CNCPS is a dynamic system that calculates predictions based on feed characteristics and rumen or post-ruminal digestibilities. Some of those nutrient values cannot be correctly measured in a lab, given the variation animal characteristics will introduce. Nevertheless, those values often show up on analyses. You can see that you can enter them in this window. Feed analysis sheets have grown increasingly complex, and there's a lot of opportunity for making keen errors or interpreting the information incorrectly. One of the ease of use enhancement programmed into AMTS is the ability to import laboratory analyses into the program. We have a video outlining that process. You will find a link to it in the video description. I want to draw your attention to 3 special input areas in the edit window. The first being the Show Default Amount section. Here, you can enter default amounts by animal type for that particular feed. For example, let's say you have a set inclusion of a trace mineral or a vitamin, or really, you could do any type of feed. You could enter that amount here. Then, when you are building diets and bring that feed in, it will be added to the diet in your pre-planned amount. This is a real time saver if you have some ingredients that you always include in a set amount. Note this calculate carbohydrate B3 digestion rate value. This allows you to input the ANDFOM time points values from the lab. When you click on that button, this window pops up. If you plan to enter the 4 time point values, you would check this box. Then you can enter the values. As you input the NDF disappeared values, you will see that the rest of the values autofill. These are placeholder values that keep the program running correctly. They should be replaced with the correct values. These time points have shown to more accurately characterize feed behaviors in the rumen. As you can see in this comparison showing 2 feeds, the one without the time point and the other with, it can make a fairly large difference in the understanding of the carbohydrate B3 rate of digestion value. There are some excellent discussions on the value of these time points in several of the nutritionist webinars. Sam Fessenden's and Michael Dineen's are 2. Finally, the notes section of the edit feed dialog allows you to add notes about a specific feed. When a note has been added to a feed, it will show with a small green square in the corner. Hover the cursor over the box to expand and read that note. Some of our feeds from the commercial feed library will also have a green box, and it will tell you where the analysis on that feed originated from. You can add information like analysis date, etc. in this box, allowing for shorter feed names. In order to retain the note and any other information you entered in this edit box, you must click the Update Values control. To close the box without saving the information, click Cancel. 2 additional bits of information I want to share before we finish this video. In my feed list, you can see a feed with a padlock symbol. This happens to be a feed from the commercial feed bank. All feeds originating from that feed bank have that symbol. As mentioned earlier, those feeds are closed to editing. They are padlocked. Sometimes you will see a feed with a red circle and white line. We call that feed locked, but it just means that it originates from another user's feed bank. It can be unlocked in 2 ways. Click on the Edit button, or if you have a lot of feeds with that symbol, you can unlock all with this button. So that wraps it up for this recording of the essentials of the feed screen. We will follow up with a demonstration on how to make your own custom feed banks and the power of feed banks in another video. As you can see, as on the cattle screen, there are many functionalities and buttons that I did not explain in this essentials video. We will return and do a more in-depth look at some of the use of these buttons in a subsequent video. While you wait for more videos, I encourage you to look around in our YouTube video channel. While they are not necessarily as thorough as our tutorial videos, we have several feed-related shorts in our What Do You Want to Know Wednesday series and in our Ruminate on This excerpts. As before, you can look for more program use tutorials and formulation tips on our AMTS website. We have blogs and videos illustrating the program use. We value your thoughtful feedback and suggestions for additional video tutorials. The next in this series will be on making a recipe or feeding cows. You can find information at Ag Model Systems or reach out to us through support@agmodelsystems.com.